Hi folks, I just wanted to come on and give you a bit of an update on the situation here in Australia and try to give you some sort of a perspective on what the overall plan is here, where they're going with this whole climate change thing and with the fires and the situation that we're facing here. And it's a very, very serious situation, folks. A lot more serious than a lot of people are realizing. I mean, a few people are probably getting it, but not enough, and not enough are getting it quick enough. As I showed you last report that I brought you, which was called Australia Wake Up or Die, if you didn't get to see that, there's a link below. As I showed you in that report, the monsoon troughs we get up here, fill the Great Artesian Basin and fill the aquifers and these river systems and all the East Coast, everything runs off the aquifer system that we have in this country. There was some speculation on that show, that report that I put out. People were arguing whether the Great Artesian Basin actually fills the coastal aquifers or whatever. I mean, these are details, folks. The fact of the matter is that the country's drying up, and it's being done deliberately, and it's been done through water mismanagement, and there's a real overall plan going on here. And we are really facing a serious situation here, folks. The fires are just, out of control. We've got fire trucks being engulfed in flames. They're really kind of selling it to the people, heading for another major heat wave. This is today's news. It's just a drastic situation that we're facing here. We've got towns running out of water, emergency water rations. We've got our Prime Minister, of course, taking a holiday in the middle of it all. If anyone thought that he actually did care, of course he's back now and he's apologising for running out on everybody, and he's admitting that it's a little bit smoky in Sydney. Interesting. And while all this is happening, what's going on, folks, is they've deliberately dried the country out. I showed you a report last week, or on the last report. I'll show you a little bit of it again, because I think it's important. We'll just watch a few seconds of it, about 30 seconds of it maybe. Just check this out in case you missed it.
1,500 kilometres of the greatest river system is empty, and it's not drought. Floodplain harvesting means where there was floodplains, they kill all the trees, level it off, and they put a big embankment to stop the water actually getting into the river. And they call that harvesting. I'm calling that rape of a river.
Welcome to what's left of the Darling River.
So, this is what's going on with the Murray-Darling Basin, all this floodplain harvesting. And what we've also got is, as I mentioned before, dams that are being built, private dams that are being built for major agri-companies. If you read some of this here, it says, just two of these dams cost taxpayers nearly 30 million, and these are private dams. And it says here that the politicians don't want to talk about these dams because they do nothing for drought-stricken communities or the health of the river or struggling farmers. Politicians are reluctant to talk about why millions of taxpayer dollars have been spent on subsidising dams that make the problems of the Murray-Darling Basin worse. It's been done deliberately, folks. You've got down here as well that these dams are designed to divert normal irrigation water and supplementary water, not to simply recycle irrigation water. Thus, they increase both evaporation and irrigation water use. These dams are being done intentionally to waste water, and it's illegal. These dams are all illegal. The water harvesting is illegal. The floodplain harvesting is illegal. All you've got to do is look at the Constitution, folks. I should have it up here somewhere. The Constitution, it should be there. It's somewhere. But it says in the Constitution, the annotated version of the Constitution, it says here, Australian Constitution, Section 100, the Commonwealth shall not, by any law or regulation of trade or commerce, abridge the right of a state or of the residents to the reasonable use of waters, of rivers for conservation or irrigation. So that's what it says in the Constitution, folks. And that means that these dams are illegal because this is all water allocation. The way they're getting around it, of course, is they're saying, well, we're getting the water from the floodplains before it gets into the river. This is the loopholes that they like to use. And what they're doing by diverting the water from getting into the river is they are abridging the right of people downstream to the use of this water. This has all been manufactured, and this has served to dry the country out. You know, I also showed you on the last report the fracking wells that are all over the country. You can see them really clearly down here in the Nullarbor Plain. There's frack wells all over the place. If you look up reports, you'll find that there's 43,000 frack wells in Australia. Each one of these wells uses between 1.5 to 16 million gallons of water. This is one of the driest countries on earth, and this is what they're doing with our water supply. Now, something else that I want to share with you here is how this is being done. Of course, while they're doing these dams and while they're doing this floodplain harvesting, we've also got stuff like this going on. Olam's selling permanent water rights in Australia to a Canadian company for 4.52.7 million. And we've also got things like, you know, this idiot doing what she's doing to help the situation along as well. So, you know, we've got all sorts of stuff going on here, folks, which is working against us. And it's important that people see it, and it's important that people understand how we're being played here. Now, looking at what has caused the drought situation in this country, this has been done very deliberately, folks. It really has. If people think, you know, geoengineering is not real, well, it is real. They are able to control the weather. You can just look at their websites, look at their own websites for cloud seeding, atmospheric, you know, research, how they do it all. There's so many books on it. There's a report that was put out by a guy, Loopy Aussie. It's quite a small YouTube channel. He put out a video showing what the radars are doing, how they're actually using these radars to create high pressure systems or sunny, but they're pushing the weather away. And it's very obvious that that's what they're doing. And I'm going to show you in a minute how they're doing that. But as he pointed out in the video that he put out, I mean, if you think geoengineering isn't real and weather modification isn't a science, well, that's just some of the books that you can get on it. You know, and you can go and look up the document that was tabled by the British House of Commons on climate remediation. I mean, there's all sorts of documents that have been published by the powers that be themselves, which show very, very clearly that climate manipulation is a reality. And as I've just shown you, cloud seeding is a reality. They can do all of this sort of stuff, folks. And looking up in the sky, looking up in the sky, I mean, you can't say this is normal activity. You can't say this is jet exhausts. You know, jets don't leave exhausts. They never left exhaust trails when I was a kid. You used to see contrails occasionally, but you need, you know, particular conditions to produce contrails. You don't just get lines like this across the sky. I mean, look at this sort of stuff. What is this? What is this? You can't say this is just exhaust trails from planes. I mean, look at the trouble you get in from having emission from your car, you know, from just driving down the street. They wouldn't be allowing planes to fly across the sky if this was the type of exhaust emissions that they put out. I mean, this would have been stopped long ago if these were actually exhaust emissions, folks. So, you know, people need to wake up to what's going on here. But an interesting thing, you know, like I said, they're drying the country out and they're creating these fires deliberately. And if you listen to some of the fireys, they'll tell you that the fires that they're fighting now, the fires that are burning here in Australia, are not like any fires they've ever seen. They're burning hotter than any other fires they've ever seen. We heard the same reports coming from the fires in California, that these fires are not like fires that they've seen in other places. Well, interesting thing, you know, if you look at chemtrails, you look at what we've found by analysing soil samples and by analysing water samples and all this sort of stuff, this is what we've found as being the active ingredients in chemtrails. Sulfate, metallic aluminium, aluminium oxide, barium titanate, strontium-90. These are other things as well, but barium, strontium and aluminium are common in all chemtrails. I mean, we found other things as well. We found things like red blood cells, desiccated erythrocytes, all of this sort of stuff. And this has caused people to speculate whether the chemtrails are being used for biological engineering, you know, how they're modifying us from the inside out. There's been all sorts of speculation about this. I've even speculated on it myself. But now I'm starting to question whether these sorts of components that have been found in chemtrails are actually a red herring. Whether they're there to simply get us looking in the other direction and not to really pay attention to the three main ingredients, which are aluminium, barium and strontium. And what might these be used for? That's an interesting question. Well, as pointed out by someone commenting on my YouTube channel, great comment, they mentioned that I should go and look up the components of sparklers. You know, sparklers, folks, that you use, on crack a night. You get sparklers, you light them, they just let off pretty sparks. You have a look at this, it's a handheld fireworks that burns slowly, emitting coloured flames, sparks and other effects. Have a look at the components of sparklers, folks. Interesting components. What do we have here? We have something that is mandatory to make the sparks is aluminium, iron, titanium, ore. These, you can use any one of these. Aluminium is one of them. And down here we have barium nitrate, oxidizer, mandatory in order for it to flame up. Yeah, you need the oxidizer to flame the aluminium. Barium nitrate, strontium nitrate. That's what's in the chemtrails, folks. Barium, strontium and aluminium. They're spraying our countries with sparkler dust. That's why the fires are burning so hot. You've got a situation here in Australia where the country is tinder dry, and you've had these chemtrails been spraying our countries for years. They're spraying it with sparkler dust. That's what they're doing. And have a look at this. Have a look at this. A weather report that came out not so long ago. It came out, I think, in October, while the fires were raging. Have a look at this weather report.
Let's check on today's weather now. And Tony, something strange going on in the skies of southern Queensland in the past day.
Good afternoon, Katrina. Yes, we've started seeing some mysterious echoes appearing on the radar. Now, they started late yesterday afternoon over the Darling Downs with trails of blue sweeping across the southeast during the evening and overnight before it all dissipated early this morning. So, what is it? Well, it's not weather-related. Skies were clear last night and there was no rain recorded anywhere. Now, one theory is that it's a thing called chaff, small metal or plastic fibres released into the air to help shield military aircraft from radar detection during exercises. No one has confirmed that, but these streams here are consistent with something being released in the upper atmosphere over the Downs, then being swept across the southeast by strong winds. Interesting nonetheless. Today, mostly sunny skies, no mysterious...
Interesting nonetheless, wouldn't you say? So are we to be expected to believe that the Australian military were conducting exercises over a fire zone and just happened to be dropping chaff to shield them from enemy radar over a fire zone in Australia? Why would they be doing that, folks? What were they really dropping? What was the chaff for? Were they fueling the fires? Is that what they've been doing with the chemtrails all along? And I would suggest that they have. I would suggest that that's what they've been doing. And of course, while all this is happening in Australia, folks, aren't we lucky? We're being more protected by our government as well. Look at this. Our police are now going to get high-powered guns in drive to sweep terror off the streets. Doesn't that make you feel safer, folks? And have a look around in your suburbs and have a look around in the city that you live and ask yourself how much terror you see on the streets of Australia. Really, the only terror you see on the streets of Australia is armed groups of thugs walking around dressed like Batman carrying automatic weapons like this. That's the only terror that you see. It all comes from the police. This is pretty drastic, folks, and that's what's happening in this country. But when you look at that, look at the components of chemtrails and realise that it's sparkler material, it's sparkler dust they've been spraying on our countries. When you go to sites like the Deagle site, I'm sure a lot of people have been to deagle.com. It's got military expenditure, a guide to military equipment and civil aviation. It tells you where they're spending stuff, what's going on, and it gives you predictions for populations as well. You go down here, you've got other stuff. It's just got here other info. And you click countries. And you go here and it gives you domestic product and population. Population projected figures for, this is 2017. You look at the projected figures. You look at the population here for Australia. Australia is number 13 on the list at this point. We have 23,230,000 people as of 2017. When you look at the projections for 2025, Australia isn't number 13 anymore. Australia is way, way down on the list, way, way down here, and we have had a population reduction of approximately 15 million people between 2017 and 2025, according to the projections, according to military expenditure. What sort of military expenditure? How much does it cost to run these chemtrail operations, these spraying operations in the sky? I shouldn't call it chemtrails, these geoengineering operations in the sky. Why would a military expenditure site be projecting population figures like this? And what are they based on? And if there was to be a population reduction of 15 million people in Australia over that period of time, how would that population reduction be carried out? Would it be done through war? Or would it be done the way they did with the way the Bolsheviks did with Russia? They simply took away their food and took away their water and let them perish. That's what's happening here in Australia, folks. This country is being genocided, and the people are simply not paying enough attention to it, and they should be. You know, and when you think about this, you know, as pointed out by Loopy Aussie on that video that he did, the amount of weather radars we've got around this country. Have a look at these weather radars. When you look at these weather radars, that is the field that they cover. So if these radars are there to actually check up on the weather and give us reports of the weather, you'd only need one. You'd need the next one to be like about there. That loop would cover that. And the next one to be about here maybe. You'd only need, you know, not a lot of these radars around the country. You know, you got, you know, you could cover the whole place with maybe 10 or 12 of these radars. I reckon you'd get around the whole country, given the distance that they cover. When you look at this picture, and have a look at the next one, I mean, these cover quite a distance. There's another one up there, shows you how much the distance is that they cover. And there's another one there. Interesting to see the clouds breaking up as they come over the country, don't you think? And these bands coming out here and these bands going across there, very interesting. But that's the distance that they cover, folks, and that's the distance that they cover. And of course, if you think there's anything weird about that cloud formation, then you're just a paranoid tin-foil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist. It's all perfectly normal. But you look at how much ground these radar stations cover, and look at how many radar stations there are around Australia. Why do we need that many radar stations if they're really just reading the weather? If they're really meteorological stations, why are they all there? Why are they all so close together? Why do we have them almost on top of each other here? They're almost on top of each other, these radars, and they're all around the country. I think there's 53 of them if you count, something like that, 55, something like that. What's it all for, folks? Is it really just to look at the weather, or is it to control the weather? You know, are they setting up high pressure systems? Are they controlling the weather in ways that we just can't imagine? Because it really would appear that they are, folks. When you look at Sydney, you look at what's going on in this country, folks. It's all being very much controlled. When you look at the Australian government has been presented to the world as a government which is ignoring the realities of climate change. It's being presented as a government which is a government of climate deniers. And you'll find that a lot of people around the world are actually climate deniers, if you want to label them as that. I mean, even the word denial is a loaded term. But a lot of people don't buy into the whole climate change thing. A lot of people get it. Even with Greta Thunberg, what she's actually done us a bit of a service, because they've kind of pushed things in the wrong way. You can see that she's very controlled. She's pushing a controlled narrative. She's pushing an agenda, and it's actually woken a lot of people up to start looking into climate change, and a lot of them are realizing that this has been manufactured. So they need an event. They need an event to push it to the world to show what happens when you ignore climate change. So they've deliberately taken the water out of this country. They've deliberately withheld the water from the people. They've deliberately dried the country out. There's been an enormous amount of effort to prevent people from collecting old firewood and collecting dead trees from forests to make sure that they tinder dry and make sure there's plenty of fuel for the fires. All the burn-offs have been stopped as well for the last 4 years, so we haven't burn off much of the scrub at all in the last 4 to 5 years, so this has caused a huge problem. They're going through after the fires and they're cutting down trees as well, saying that these trees are a fire hazard. They left all the fuel there to begin with to have the fire, and anything that has survived they're cutting down as being a fire hazard. You know, they want to devastate this country. They want to show the world what happens when you ignore climate change. Look what just happened to Australia. And they intend to genocide the people of this country to push their point. They don't care about the people of this country. You know, they've taken the water from the people of this country. And as I said, all these wells are illegal. All these dams are illegal. All of this restriction of water is illegal. Selling water is illegal. Even paying your water rates is illegal, because it says in the Constitution there shall be no trade or commerce on water. That's just the way it is. But they need to set Australia up as an example to the rest of the world. So they intend to genocide this country, and the people of the country just don't get it. They really don't get it, but that's what's happening, folks. You know, they've dried the country out. They've manipulated the weather to push all the clouds away. And you can talk to people in Tasmania as well. They will tell you that on the west coast of Tasmania, it's been hammering rain for the last few months. It just won't stop. And that's all the weather that they're pushing down from Western Australia. It doesn't usually rain this time of the year in Tasmania. It's usually raining on the mainland. But now it's not. It's not raining on the mainland, and it's raining in Tasmania, pushing all the weather away everywhere else. Dried the country out, they've sprayed it with sparkler dust, and they presented this government to the world as being a government of climate change deniers. You know, so much in denial of it that the Prime Minister would even take a holiday to Hawaii in the middle of a firestorm. You know, this whole thing has been set up, folks. They need you all to believe in man-made climate change. They need you all to be paranoid about this and to not pay attention to the bigger picture, which is really the grand solar minimums that are happening. And there's a lot of people that are aware of the grand solar minimums. China has set themselves up in a very, very comfortable position where they will survive the grand solar minimums. This is why they've bought up so much farmland here in Australia. They've really set themselves up to be able to be in a position where they can still grow food in areas where food is going to grow during the oncoming solar minimum that's about to happen in the next very short time, within the next decade or two. So they're really positioning themselves to be able to get through this. China is really leading the way in that respect. But they're genociding the people of this country in order to make a point to the rest of the world. And you can't tell it to the people. They just don't get it. They won't listen. Some do. Some understand it. But many won't listen. You know, they don't understand that it's our right to have the water that's held up in these places, these dams. All of this has been done simply to deprive it from the people and to dry the country out. You know, all of this agri-farming and all of this restriction of water is all illegal, the whole thing. And the people of this country need to wake up. They really need to wake up to what's going on here. This is a very, very serious situation. And the rest of the world needs to pay attention, because they've been spraying your countries with sparkler dust as well. And they will use this to push the concept of climate change in your own countries. And another interesting thing I've been noticing here where I live, and I live quite close to the coast. I live only 8-10 kilometres from the ocean where I live. It's rainforest, and it's a beautiful valley setting. Creek out the front, which is dry at the moment, and it's never been dry. But, you know, I live in not very far from the coast, and something that I'm noticing is that, you know, so many of the birds aren't there in the morning that used to be there. I used to go out and I used to sit there and listen to the bird calls every morning. There's probably about a third or a quarter of the bird calls there now. Just in the last couple of months, they've all gone elsewhere, obviously, looking for water. And something else that I'm noticing is that here it is, the 20th of December, something like that. It's fairly into December. It's the middle of summer here in Australia. The days are extremely hot. We've got a massive heat wave happening. But at night, I'm still sleeping with a doona. I'm still quite cold. Very cool nights here at the moment, unseasonably cool. And this is because the ground's drying out, because as many people know, when you are in the desert, it doesn't matter how hot it gets in the daytime, the temperatures always plummet at night. And the fact that the temperatures are dropping so much at night here in the middle of summer when I'm this close to the coast, and it's been happening, it's been ongoing. Like, there hasn't been any time this year that I've actually taken the doona off my bed yet. And this indicates that the ground is drying out. Even though there's still grass here and there's still trees here, it's turning into a desert, and it's being done deliberately, folks. We can still turn this around if we release the water back into the river system and we pay attention to the fact that, this government is a criminal entity. It's a criminal entity, it's a corporation, and they're running a mining operation here. You can look at the cities and Sydney and the Gold Coast and all the places here are simply the recreational areas for the mining operations that are happening in this country. And if you think Australia isn't a corporation, folks, well, it is. You can go and look it up yourself. It's a corporation. There's the number there. It's a corporation, and it's running mining operations. And as I said, folks, the people of this country need to wake up. That's what I attempted to do with the last video that I put out, just to let people know that we've got a very urgent situation here. I got a couple of things wrong in that video. I mentioned that Australia has been a corporation that's been invalid and all this sort of stuff. I said the government of Australia has been invalid since Bob Hawke signed the Australia Act in 1973. That's what I said on the last report that I did, but I was actually mistaken. I got it mixed up. I got still a lot of stuff rattling around in my head, folks. It was Gough Whitlam actually announced the Queen of Australia in 1973, and Bob Hawke introduced the Australia Act in 1988 against a referendum that we had as a population. We ran a referendum, held a referendum to ask whether we would give government power to local councils, and we all voted no. So Bob Hawke wrote the Australia Act, and he said, well, we're going to give power to local councils anyway through that act. But it's an invalid act. It actually says within the act that the Constitution will not be affected. So that's the way it goes, folks. And it also says within the Constitution, for any people who claim that these water restrictions are, these are state legislation and, they want to take you to magistrates court or any of this sort of stuff over these issues, it doesn't matter, folks, because it also says in Section 2, Clause 5 of the preamble of the Constitution, that this act applies to all courts, all judges, all states and all people within the Commonwealth. So any judge or lawyer that tells you the Constitution does not apply here in any situation is wrong. The Constitution applies in every situation. And if they're telling you it doesn't, then I guess they just became a constitutional matter for the Supreme Court as well. But that's the situation that we're in, folks. We've got to pay attention to what's going on here. And I think the reality to what's being sprayed on our countries is actually sparkler dust, and that is what is causing the ferocity of these fires. Is a very significant piece of information that people need to take on board for their own countries. But you watch how this plays out, folks. If the people of Australia don't wake up, they will genocide this country through starvation and thirst and fire, and then they will use it as an example to the rest of the world as what happens if you don't pay attention to climate change. The government of Australia chose to ignore climate change, and oh, look what happened to the people of Australia. Now half of them are dead and the rest of them are refugees. So that's why we need to pay attention to climate change. It's all part of the agenda, folks, and it's being done deliberately. But as I said, we could release this water. We could reclaim control of this situation if the people just stood up and said enough is enough. And we don't even need any violent revolution. We just have to stop complying with this system, stop going along with it, down tools. Stop going to work and paying your taxes and doing all this. Stop supporting the criminal racketeering that is the Australian government system, folks. It's time to snap out of the slumber and wake up, because we have a real situation here. Thanks for listening. In Lakesh. And again, I was going to bring you a show on history this week, just to interrupt my ending and my goodbye. But I was going to bring you a show on history this week, but it's just too much going on with these fires on my mind. And there's a lot of stuff I do want to bring you about history, and I want to do another report on the Epstein situation, a lot of stuff. But there's just too much important stuff that needs to be dealt with these fires and this extreme loss of water. There was even a report on the mainstream that I meant to have there in the news reports, but I somehow misplaced it. But it says that Sydney will very likely be out of water within 2 to 2.5 years as well. So again, folks, they're doing this while they're withholding the water themselves through trade and commerce, and it's a racket, and it's being done deliberately. So pay attention, folks, so we can turn things around and we can go and release the water. It's our constitutional duty to release the water. And, we need to form some sort of a valid government. I reckon we should put the Aboriginal people in charge of managing the water in this country, because they know how this country works, and they know where the aquifers are, and they know how the river systems work, and they know how to manage them. That's who should be in control of the environment in this country, not the people in Canberra. Have a nice day, folks, in Lakesh.